In the fog-shrouded town of Gullhaven, Maine, a grieving marine biologist was about to inherit more than just property. What started as signing papers for a $5 lighthouse took a shocking turn when she discovered her father's death 30 years ago was no accident. It was murder. Rachel Kincaid wasn't your typical inheritance recipient. For the past decade, she had spent her life mapping the ocean's darkest trenches, known for her refusal to ignore inconvenient truths, a trait that had just cost her her career as a whistleblower. When she encountered a leather-bound journal hidden in the decaying lighthouse, she had no idea she was walking into a deadly conspiracy that had already claimed 2 lives. Rachel made a choice that would lead to exposing a Cold War weapon still humming beneath the granite cliffs, a sonar prototype capable of triggering earthquakes and sinking ships without leaving evidence. What began as a simple trip to claim an abandoned tower would become a race against time to destroy a machine before it collapsed the entire coastline. The town of Gullhaven would never be the same as Rachel Kincaid chose truth over survival, forcing the Navy's darkest secret into the light, even as something beneath the waves continued to pulse, waiting, listening, patient as the ocean itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel Kincaid had never seen a town that made people look at strangers the way drowning men looked at driftwood, desperate and afraid in equal measure. But there she stood at the edge of Gullhaven's salt-warped dock, holding a manila envelope containing the deed to a lighthouse she had never heard of until 3 weeks ago. The fog rolled in from the Atlantic like a living thing, swallowing the fishing boats one by one as they returned to harbor. She counted 5 vessels before the mist grew too thick to see anything beyond the weathered pilings. The locals moved with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized by decades of repetition, but not one of them would meet her eyes. Rachel adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and walked toward the small municipal building where she was supposed to sign the inheritance papers. Her boots echoed on the wooden planks, each step sounding louder than it should in the afternoon quiet. The sign above the harbor master's office creaked in the wind, metal scraping against metal, a sound that set her teeth on edge. Inside, Sheriff Henry Calloway waited behind a scarred oak desk, his smile warm enough to thaw ice, but his eyes cold as the water beyond the window. He stood when she entered, extending a hand that engulfed hers completely. "Miss Kincaid, we've been expecting you." His voice carried the rough texture of a man who had spent his life breathing salt air and keeping secrets. "Terrible shame about your uncle. Edwin was a fixture in this town for 30 years. Rachel withdrew her hand, noting how the sheriff had positioned himself between her and the door, casual but deliberate. "I never knew I had an uncle in Maine." "Family trees have a way of surprising us." Calloway pushed a stack of papers across the desk. "The lighthouse at Widow's Point. Edwin left it to you for $5 and the promise you'd respect its history. Those were his exact words." She scanned the documents, her trained eye catching details others might miss. The lighthouse had been decommissioned in 1963. Multiple structural assessments warned against occupation. A footnote mentioned federal interest in the property that had been resolved in 1974. Rachel's fingers traced that line, feeling the impression where someone had pressed too hard with their pen. "What kind of history am I supposed to respect?" Calloway's smile tightened at the corners. "The lighthouse has been dark for over 30 years. Some things are better left sealed, Miss Kincaid. Your uncle understood that. And yet he left it to me. Edwin had his reasons, I'm sure, but the point still stands. That tower's a hazard. The cliffs are unstable, the structures unsound, and locals have their superstitions. My advice? Sign it over to the Historical Society and let them worry about it. Rachel signed her name at the bottom of the deed transfer, her signature sharp and deliberate. I think I'll see it first. The drive to Widow's Point took 20 minutes on a coastal road that seemed designed to shake apart anything not built for punishment. Rachel gripped the steering wheel of her rented sedan as potholes appeared out of the fog like traps. The Atlantic crashed against rocks somewhere to her right, invisible but relentless, a reminder of how quickly the ocean could erase anything human. The lighthouse appeared suddenly, thrust up from the cliffs like a broken tooth. It stood taller than she had imagined, the red brick tower rising 60 feet above a stone foundation that seemed to grow directly from the granite shelf. The beacon chamber at the top had lost half of its glass panels, and the metal framework showed through like exposed bone. Rachel parked in the overgrown lot where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt. The air smelled of rotting seaweed and something else, something metallic that made her think of old batteries left too long in the rain. She approached the entrance, an arched doorway with a rusted iron gate hanging from a single hinge. The door opened with a shriek of protesting metal. Inside, darkness swallowed the afternoon light. Rachel fumbled for her flashlight, the beam cutting through shadows thick as smoke. The first floor was a circular chamber maybe 20 feet across with a spiral staircase ascending the tower's core. Everything was coated in dust and bird droppings, yet beneath the decay she could see signs of recent habitation. Boot prints in the grime, a plastic bottle water near the wall, the label still readable. In the corner, half hidden behind a fallen beam, she found a metal filing cabinet. 3 of the drawers had been pried open and emptied, but the bottom one remained locked. Rachel knelt beside it, testing the lock with her pocket knife. The mechanism gave after a moment of pressure, and the drawer slid open with a metallic rasp. Inside lay a single leather-bound journal, its pages swollen with moisture, but still intact. The cover bore her uncle's name embossed in fading gold, Edwin Kincaid, Keeper of the Light. Rachel lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of decades in her hands. She flipped it open to a random page. The handwriting was cramped and urgent, filling every available space. September 17th, 1971. The hum has returned. 3 nights now. I've checked every inch of the foundation, but the vibration seems to come from below, from the shelf itself. Jonas's grandfather was right. They didn't remove it. They buried it deeper. Rachel's pulse quickened. She turned more pages, finding entries that made less sense the more she read. October 3, 1971. Echo Light Protocol active at 0300 hours. Registered contact at 400 fathoms, bearing 127. The Navy insists the prototype was dismantled, but I've seen the readings. Something down there is still listening. November 12, 1971. Calloway came today with his warnings, said if I kept digging, I'd regret it. But they don't understand. If what I've found is real, if the reports were accurate, then my brother David didn't die in a navigation accident. They sank him. Rachel's breath caught. David. Her father's name had been David Kincaid, a naval researcher who had died when his vessel sank off the Maine coast in 1971, officially ruled an equipment failure during a routine survey. She had been 2 years old. The journal shook in her hands. She forced herself to keep reading, to push through the implications trying to surface in her mind. January 8, 1972. I've mapped the chamber beneath the foundation. The naval insignia on the sealed door confirms it. Project Neptune Array, the sonar prototype that could find anything beneath the ocean floor. They told David it was being destroyed. Instead, they hid it here, right under this lighthouse, and when he threatened to expose them, the entry ended abruptly. as if Edwin had been interrupted mid-sentence. The next 50 pages were blank. Then, near the back of the journal, written in a different hand, shakier and more recent. If you're reading this, you're probably related to me. They'll tell you I died of a heart attack. Don't believe them. The thing they buried is still here, still humming, still waiting. And they'll kill to keep it secret. Trust Jonas Marrow, but trust no one else, especially not the sheriff. E.K. March 1997. March 1997. Her uncle had died in April. Rachel sat back against the filing cabinet, the journal clutched to her chest. The beam of her flashlight swung across the circular chamber, catching on details she hadn't noticed before. Scratches on the stone floor near the center, as if something heavy had been dragged. Fresh oil stains that shouldn't exist in an abandoned building. And near the base of the spiral staircase, barely visible in the shadows, a metal hatch set into the floor. Outside, the sun was setting. Rachel knew she should leave, find a motel in town, come back tomorrow with better equipment and daylight. But the hatch called to her with the same gravitational pull that had drawn her into marine biology, into the deep places where light couldn't reach and pressure crushed ordinary things to powder. She crossed to the hatch, her footsteps echoing in the stone chamber. The metal surface was cold beneath her palm, colder than the ambient temperature could account for. And when she pressed her ear against it, listening, she heard what her uncle had described. A hum, low and rhythmic, like machinery that had been running so long it had worn grooves into the fabric of reality itself. The sound made her teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. Rachel pulled back, her heart hammering. She should leave. She should drive back to Boston, forget this inheritance, let the lighthouse rot into the sea. Instead, she found herself ascending the spiral staircase, climbing toward the beacon chamber as darkness filled the tower. If she was going to spend the night here, she wanted to see what her uncle had seen, wanted to understand what had driven him to spend 3 decades guarding this place. The stairs groaned under her weight, rust flaking away with each step. On the second level, she found evidence of her uncle's long occupation: a cot, a camping stove, boxes of canned food. On the third level, electronic equipment that made no sense: oscilloscopes and frequency analyzers, their screens dark but their presence suggested someone had been monitoring something. At the top, in the beacon chamber itself, Rachel stood among the broken glass and watched nightfall over the Atlantic. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. Beyond that, nothing but gray emptiness and the crash of invisible waves. That's when she saw the light. It came from below, from the direction of the cliffs. A faint blue glow that pulsed in time with the hum she had felt through the hatch, once every 10 seconds, regular as a heartbeat. The light seemed to come from beneath the ocean itself, from some impossible depth where no natural phenomenon could exist. Rachel stood transfixed, counting the pulses. After the 30th flash, she heard something new. Footsteps on the stairs. Below. Someone climbing towards her, moving slowly but deliberately through the darkened tower. She killed her flashlight and pressed herself against the curved wall, her hand finding a piece of broken timber she could use as a weapon. The footsteps grew closer, ascending the spiral staircase with the confidence of someone who knew this place intimately. A male voice called out from the darkness below. "Miss Kincaid? I know you're up there. I saw your car. My name is Jonas Marrow, and we need to talk about what you've inherited." Rachel didn't lower her makeshift weapon. She'd learned long ago that people who claimed you needed to talk were often the ones most interested in your silence. The footsteps continued their steady ascent, and a moment later, a man emerged into the beacon chamber carrying an LED lantern that made her flashlight look like a child's toy. Jonas Marrow was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with a kind of weathered face that came from spending too much time exposed to wind and salt. He wore canvas work pants and a heavy wool sweater, and he moved through the broken glass with the ease of someone who had made this climb 1,000 times before. He stopped when he saw the timber in her hand, raising his palms in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. I maintain the grounds.
Or I try to anyway. Your uncle paid me to keep people away from the tower. Then why are you here? Rachel kept the timber raised, even as her arm began to ache. Because I saw the light on, and I thought... He paused, his expression shifting to something like grief. I thought maybe Edwin had come back. I know that sounds foolish, but this place has a way of making you believe in possible things. Rachel studied his face in the lantern light, looking for signs of deception. She found nothing but exhaustion and something deeper, a kind of resigned guilt that reminded her of her own reflection in recent months. She lowered the timber, but kept it within reach. What do you know about Echo Light Protocol? Jonas's eyes widened fractionally, a tell so subtle she almost missed it. You found the journal. I found enough to know my uncle didn't die of natural causes, and that whatever's buried under this lighthouse, people are willing to kill for it. Rachel moved to the window, keeping Jonas in her peripheral vision. The sheriff told me to sell this place to the Historical Society, and now you're here, in the dark, just happening to check on things. So either explain yourself or get out. Jonas set the lantern on the floor between us, a gesture of trust or vulnerability. She couldn't tell. My grandfather worked here during what they called the decommission, 1963. Except it wasn't a decommission, it was a cover-up. There was an explosion. 6 men died. The official story was a fuel leak in the generator room. The real story is that the Navy was installing something beneath the foundation, and whatever it was, it didn't want to be installed. A sonar prototype. Jonas looked at her sharply. He told you. He wrote it down, along with the fact that he thought it killed my father. Rachel's voice came out harder than she intended. Did it?
I don't know. Jonas rubbed his face, suddenly looking older. I was 10 years old when David Kincaid's ship went down. I remember my grandfather stopping eating for 3 days afterward. He kept saying, it shouldn't have been active, it shouldn't have been active, over and over, until my grandmother called the doctor. They sedated him. He never spoke about it again. The hum chose that moment to intensify, a deep vibration that Rachel felt in her sternum. Jonas noticed her reaction and nodded grimly. You feel it too? It's been getting stronger the last few months, ever since Edwin died. Some nights I can hear it from my house, 2 miles inland. He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the fog-shrouded ocean. Whatever's down there, it knows Edwin's gone. It's waking up. Rachel wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as paranoia or local superstition, but she had spent her career studying the ocean's mysteries, had seen bioluminescent creatures in the deep trenches that defied explanation, and had recorded sounds in the Mariana Trench that shouldn't exist according to known biology. The ocean kept secrets, and some of them were dangerous. Show me, she said. Jonas turned from the window. Show you what? Whatever's beneath this lighthouse, the chamber Edwin wrote about, the sealed door. Show me everything. Miss Kincaid, Rachel, and I'm not asking for permission. I picked up the lantern, its weight solid and reassuring in my hand. You said you maintain the grounds. That means you have keys. That means you know how to get down there. So either help me, or I'll find my way myself. Jonas studied her for a long moment, and Rachel saw the decision forming behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Tomorrow morning, when there's light. The foundation is dangerous even with proper equipment, and some of the passages... He stopped himself. Tomorrow. I'll bring what we need. Why not now? Because the tide. Jonas pointed toward the window, where the fog was beginning to thin. The lower chamber floods at high tide. We go down there now, we'll drown before we find anything. The tide turns at dawn. That's when we go. Rachel wanted to argue, to insist, but the scientist in her recognized the wisdom of caution. She had no equipment, no real plan, and Jonas clearly knew this place better than she did. Patience had never been her strength, but it had kept her alive this long. Dawn, she agreed. But if you're not here, I'm going down alone. I'll be here. Jonas retrieved his lantern and moved toward the stairs. At the entrance to the spiral staircase, he paused. "Your uncle was a good man. He spent 30 years trying to make right what happened to your father. Don't think that because he failed, it means he didn't care." Before Rachel could respond, Jonas descended into the darkness, his footsteps fading until she was alone again in the beacon chamber. She watched the blue light pulse beneath the waves, counting the intervals, memorizing the pattern. Every 10 seconds, regular as a metronome. Whatever was down there had been running for decades, hidden but not dormant. She descended to the 3rd level, where her uncle's electronic equipment waited like a museum of obsolete technology. Rachel ran her hands over the oscilloscopes, the frequency analyzers, the spectral monitors. Some of the equipment was still plugged in, connected to an old diesel generator that hummed quietly in the corner. On impulse, she flipped the power switch on the largest oscilloscope. The screen flickered to life, green phosphors glowing in the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a waveform appeared, a regular sinusoidal pattern that pulsed in time with the hum she felt through the floor. Rachel adjusted the frequency dial, narrowing the bandwidth. The waveform sharpened, revealing harmonics she hadn't noticed before. Someone had been monitoring this. Her uncle had been recording the hum, measuring its variations, tracking its intensity over time. She found a spiral notebook beside the oscilloscope, filled with Edwin's cramped handwriting. Pages and pages of frequency measurements, amplitude readings, timestamps. The most recent entry was dated April 3, 1997, 2 weeks before his death. Frequency increasing by 0.3 Hz every 24 hours. Amplitude up 12% since January. If this continues, the resonance cascade will reach critical threshold by midsummer. The cliffs won't hold. The town won't hold. Someone has to stop it. But I'm out of time. Rachel felt cold, despite the mild spring air. Resonance cascade. She knew that term from her work studying underwater acoustics. It referred to a phenomenon where sound waves amplified each other, building toward a catastrophic release of energy. Submarines avoided certain depths to prevent their hulls from resonating to destruction. Buildings in earthquake zones were designed to avoid resonant frequencies. If the sonar prototype was generating a resonance cascade in the granite shelf beneath the lighthouse, the entire cliff face could collapse. And if her uncle's calculations were correct, it would happen in less than 4 months. She descended to the ground floor, moving quickly now, driven by urgency. The metal hatch in the center of the chamber seemed to pulse in time with the hum, or maybe that was just her imagination. Rachel knelt beside it, examining the locking mechanism. It was more sophisticated than she had realized, a combination lock rather than a keyhole. But someone had scratched numbers into the metal beside the dial, barely visible. 173209. Rachel tried the combination. The lock clicked open. She should wait for Jonas. She should follow the plan. But the numbers had been left there deliberately, a message from her uncle or an invitation from someone else. And Rachel had never been good at ignoring invitations into the unknown. She lifted the hatch. The smell that rose from below wasn't decay or salt water. It was ozone, the sharp scent of electricity and metal heated past its tolerance. Beneath that, something else, a chemical odor she associated with laboratories and clean rooms, the smell of machinery kept too pristine in places that should have been abandoned. A ladder descended into absolute darkness. Rachel aimed her flashlight down, but the beam seemed to be absorbed before it could illuminate anything. The hum was louder now, no longer a distant vibration, but a physical presence that made her fillings ache. She began to climb down. The ladder descended farther than Rachel expected, rung after rung disappearing into darkness that seemed to absorb her flashlight beam. She counted 23 steps before her feet touched solid ground, putting her at least 20 feet below the lighthouse's foundation. The air down here was different,
cooler and drier than the damp, salt atmosphere above, as if she had entered a separate ecosystem maintained by unseen systems. Rachel swept her flashlight across the space, and her breath caught in her throat. She stood in a corridor carved directly from the granite shelf, its walls smooth and precise, in a way that spoke of industrial excavation rather than natural formation. The passage stretched ahead, maybe 40 feet, before ending at a bulkhead door. The door's surface was painted navy gray, and stenciled across it in faded yellow letters, "Authorized personnel only, Project Neptune Array." The official designation, the proof that Edwin's journal had been telling the truth. Rachel approached the door slowly, her flashlight revealing details that made her pulse quicken. The bulkhead had been welded shut from the outside, thick beads of metal forming a seal around its entire circumference. But someone had been cutting through the welds, recently.
Fresh metal shavings littered the ground, and an industrial torch sat propped against the wall, its fuel tanks still connected. Someone else had been down here, someone who knew about the sealed chamber and was working to open it. The hum emanated from beyond the door, strong enough now that Rachel could feel it in her chest, a second heartbeat overlaying her own. She pressed her palm against the metal surface and felt warmth, as if the machinery behind it generated heat that had nowhere to dissipate. Footsteps sounded above her, rapid and purposeful. Someone had entered the lighthouse. Rachel killed her flashlight and pressed herself against the corridor wall, her mind racing through possibilities. Jonas? Coming back to stop her? The sheriff, having been alerted to her presence? Or whoever had been cutting through the welds, returning to finish their work? The footsteps reached the hatch. Light spilled down from above, the harsh white glare of a halogen work lamp. A man's silhouette appeared at the top of the ladder, backlit and featureless. "Miss Kincaid?" Sheriff Calloway's voice echoed down the shaft. "I know you're down there. Your car is still in the lot, and the hatch is open. We need to talk." Rachel stayed silent, barely breathing. The sheriff's presence here, at night, removing any pretense of casual concern, confirmed what her uncle's journal had suggested. Calloway wasn't just aware of the chamber, he was protecting it. "I'm coming down," Calloway said, "and I'm bringing a friend. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what your uncle left you." The sheriff descended the ladder with surprising agility for a man his size. When he reached the bottom, he was followed by a second figure, this one smaller and older. The halogen lamp illuminated them both, and Rachel's heart sank when she recognized the second person. "Jonas Marrow." "I'm sorry," Jonas said, not meeting her eyes. "But you shouldn't have opened the hatch. You shouldn't have come down here alone." Calloway pulled a flashlight from his belt and aimed it directly at Rachel's position. She had nowhere to hide, no way to retreat. The corridor behind her dead-ended at the sealed door, and the only exit led past the two men now blocking her path. "Smart woman," Calloway said, his earlier warmth completely absent. "Figured out more in one afternoon than most people learn in a lifetime of living here. Your uncle would be proud. Or horrified. Hard to say." He gestured toward the sealed door. "That's federal property, Miss Kincaid. Has been since 1963. Opening it, even attempting to open it, is a felony." "Then arrest me." Rachel forced her voice steady, refusing to show fear. "Or better yet, explain why the federal government has a sealed chamber beneath an unabandoned lighthouse, generating enough resonance to collapse this cliff by summer." Calloway's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face before he could mask it. "You read his calculations." "I'm a marine biologist. I understand acoustics. I understand resonance." Pointed toward the sealed door. "Whatever's behind there is active. It's been running for decades, and it's getting stronger. You know this. You've known this, and you've been sitting on it, watching this town edge toward disaster because of... what? Money? Orders from someone in Washington?" Both, Calloway said simply. The Navy pays me $12,000 a month to ensure this place stays sealed and undiscovered. Your uncle's death complicated things, but we thought the inheritance would scare you off. Instead, here you are, breaking federal law and making threats. Jonas stepped forward, his face anguished. Rachel, please, just leave. Sell the lighthouse and go back to Boston. They won't hurt you if you just walk away. The way they hurt my father? The words came out sharp as glass. Tell me, Sheriff, was David Kincaid's death an equipment failure, or did someone activate that sonar when his ship passed overhead? Calloway's jaw tightened, and Rachel knew she had struck true. The silence that followed felt heavy as stone, broken only by the relentless hum from beyond the sealed door. Finally, Calloway spoke, his voice low and hard. Your father was a good man who couldn't leave well enough alone. He discovered what the Neptune array could do, what it had already been used for, and he threatened to expose it. That would have destroyed careers, ended programs, maybe started congressional investigations that would have reached the highest levels of the Navy. So yes, Miss Kincaid, they activated the array. They sank his ship, and they classified it as an accident. And you helped cover it up? I was 23 years old and fresh out of the academy, Calloway said. No remorse, only tired pragmatism. I was told to keep quiet or join your father at the bottom of the Atlantic. I chose to live. I've chosen to keep living every day since.
By taking their money, by guarding their secrets. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. How many others have died to protect this place? Just 2. A new voice spoke from above, thin and aged, but clear. David Kincaid and Edwin Kincaid. Brothers who couldn't let the past stay buried. Rachel looked up to see an elderly woman descending the ladder with surprising grace. She wore a cardigan and sensible shoes and carried herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had outlived her fears. When she reached the bottom, she smiled at Rachel with genuine warmth. My name is Evelyn Strand. I work at the town library, and I've been waiting 30 years for someone like you to arrive. Calloway turned on Evelyn, his face darkening with anger. What are you doing here? What I should have done decades ago. Evelyn reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a small leather-bound book, barely larger than her palm. Miss Kincaid, your uncle left something in the library's restricted archives, something he wanted you to have if you proved brave enough to dig for the truth. She held out the book. It's a cipher key. Edwin's journal is encoded beyond the surface entries. Everything he really learned, everything he really discovered is hidden in the margins and between the lines. This will reveal it all. Rachel took the book, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. Not just information, but proof, evidence that could expose the Navy's crimes, bring justice for her father, maybe even shut down whatever machinery still hummed behind the sealed door. Calloway reached for his service weapon, but Evelyn raised her hand, stopping him with a gesture. Before you do something you'll regret, Sheriff, consider this. I've been documenting everything for 30 years. Names, dates, payments, deaths. I've kept records of every visitor who came to this lighthouse, every federal agent who paid you off, every suspicious accident that kept the secret buried. Those records are in a safe deposit box in Portland, with instructions to open them if I die under even slightly unusual circumstances. She smiled at him, sweet and terrible. So, unless you want to spend your remaining years in federal prison, I suggest you let Miss Kincaid leave, with the cipher, with the truth. The standoff stretched out, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Rachel's hand moved to the cipher book, ready to defend it if necessary. Jonas looked between all of them, clearly torn between loyalty and conscience. Finally, Calloway lowered his hand from his weapon. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn. They won't let this stand. You know what they're capable of. I've known for 34 years. The difference is, I'm finally ready to stop being afraid." She turned to Rachel. "Come to the library tomorrow. Bring your uncle's journal. I'll help you decode it, and I'll tell you everything I know about Project Neptune Array, everything I was too frightened to say while Edwin was alive." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He tried so hard to protect me, to protect everyone. But some truths are too important to stay buried, even when speaking them means paying the ultimate price." Rachel nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Evelyn had risked everything, had spent decades preparing for this confrontation, all to help a stranger uncover a truth that might destroy them both. Evelyn climbed the ladder first, moving slowly but steadily. Rachel followed, clutching the cipher book and her uncle's journal. Jonas came next, his face unreadable. Calloway remained at the bottom, staring at the sealed door, his expression a mixture of resignation and something darker. "This isn't over," he called up. "You're opening doors that should stay closed. When the people who commissioned that machine find out what you're doing, they won't send warnings, they'll send solutions." Rachel didn't respond. She climbed out of the hatch and into the lighthouse's ground floor, where the first gray light of false dawn was beginning to filter through the broken windows. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the ocean beyond, dark and restless, keeping its secrets and its dead. Evelyn was waiting by the entrance, her cardigan pulled tight against the morning chill. "I'll see you at the library, 9 o'clock. Don't be late, Miss Kincaid. We have a lot of work to do, and I suspect we're running out of time." She left without another word, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness with the steady gait of someone who had finally made peace with a difficult decision. Jonas emerged from the hatch, closing it behind him. He looked at Rachel with an expression that mingled shame and hope. "I meant what I said earlier. Your uncle was a good man, and I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think he would have wanted you to finish what he started, whatever that means. It means finding the truth. It means making sure my father's death wasn't for nothing. The truth has a cost." Jonas glanced back at the hatch, where Calloway was presumably still standing in the darkness below. "Evelyn just made herself a target. And if you keep digging, you will too. I've been a target since I inherited this place. The only question is whether I run or fight." Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "For what it's worth, I'll help you. My grandfather took his guilt to the grave. I won't do the same." He left through the main entrance, his footsteps crunching on gravel as he walked toward a pickup truck Rachel hadn't noticed in the darkness. The engine started with a cough of blue smoke, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the lighthouse and its buried secrets. Rachel stood in the circular chamber as dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the fog in shades of gold and crimson. The hum beneath her feet continued its relentless rhythm, a heartbeat from the deep that had been counting time for decades, waiting for someone to finally listen. She opened her uncle's journal and pressed the cipher book against its pages, ready to begin the work of translation, ready to uncover what Edwin really learned, what he really discovered in his 30 years of vigil. The first encoded message, when she applied the cipher, read, "They didn't just sink David's ship. They used the array to map something else that day, something that should have stayed lost. The question isn't why they killed him, it's what they found." Rachel stared at the decoded words as the sun rose higher, burning away the fog, revealing the vast expanse of ocean that held her father's bones and God knows what else. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't leaving Gullhaven until she had answers, until she had justice, until she had made the people responsible pay for every life they destroyed to keep their secrets buried in the dark. Rachel arrived at the Gullhaven Public Library precisely at 9 o'clock, the cipher book and journal tucked inside her messenger bag. The building was a converted sea captain's mansion, all weathered shingles and salt-stained windows, bookshelving where parlors had once hosted society gatherings. Evelyn Strand waited at a corner table in the maritime history section, surrounded by open volumes and yellowed newspaper clippings. She looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had spent decades cataloging secrets. I was a stenographer, 1963 to 1971, employed by a naval contractor doing classified work along the coast. They brought me in because I was young, local, and poor enough to need the money without asking questions. She pushed a folder across the table. I documented everything about Project Neptune Array, every meeting, every test, every failure.
Rachel opened the folder, scanning pages of typed minutes and technical specifications. The sonar prototype had been designed to map ocean floor topography with unprecedented accuracy, capable of detecting objects as small as a briefcase at depths exceeding 3,000 feet. But something had gone wrong during the installation beneath Widow's Point. The granite shelf beneath the lighthouse has unique acoustic properties, Evelyn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It amplifies sonar signals instead of dispersing them. The engineers realized too late that activating the array created a feedback loop. The explosion that killed 6 men wasn't an accident. It was the machine trying to destroy itself. But they didn't shut it down. They couldn't. The prototype was too valuable, and shutting it down completely would have meant excavating the entire foundation. So they sealed it, classified the project, and paid your uncle to ensure no one ever tried to reactivate it. Evelyn's hands trembled as she pulled out one final document, its edges brown with age. But Edwin wasn't just a guardian. He was a witness. He saw what the array could do, what it had already done. The document was a naval casualty report dated October 1971. David Kincaid's ship, the research vessel Meridian, lost with all hands during a routine coastal survey. Cause of death? Catastrophic hull failure due to equipment malfunction. Except someone had written in the margins, in Edwin's cramped hand, array activated 0247 hours, meridian directly above focus point. Resonance pulse measured at 147 decibels. Hull integrity impossible. Rachel's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. They murdered him. They silenced him, and they'll silence anyone who threatens to expose what the array was really used for. Evelyn reached across the table, gripping Rachel's hand with surprising strength. Your uncle spent 30 years trying to gather enough evidence to bring them to justice. He failed because he was alone. You don't have to be. Before Rachel could respond, Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. I need to file these books. Lock the folder in your car and don't tell anyone you are here. Rachel watched her walk away, her cardigan bright against the dark shelves, a small woman carrying the weight of decades. She gathered the documents, stuffing them into her bag alongside the cipher book, feeling the accumulated mass of evidence pressing against her ribs. She was halfway to her car when Jonas found her, jogging across the library parking lot with his face pale and drawn. "Evelyn," he said, breathing hard. "They found her an hour ago. Heart attack, they're saying. She died in her sleep." The world tilted beneath Rachel's feet. She had spoken to Evelyn less than 3 hours ago. The woman had been sharp, focused, determined. Hearts didn't simply stop beating between morning and noon without help. "Calloway?" Rachel managed to ask. "He's at her house now, official and concerned, taking statements. But I saw him near the library earlier this morning, watching. He knew she was talking to you." Rachel's hand moved to her bag, to the documents Evelyn had died to protect. The price of truth was being paid in blood, and she had barely begun to understand the full cost. Rachel hired Captain Mira Devane through a coastal salvage company in Portland, explaining she needed help exploring the cliffs beneath Widow's Point. She didn't mention the lighthouse's history or what she expected to find. Mira's reputation for discretion and competence was enough. The captain arrived at dawn in a dive boat loaded with equipment, her gray eyes assessing Rachel with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen too many secrets pulled from the ocean floor. "You're looking for something specific. People don't hire salvage divers for sightseeing. My uncle documented a sealed chamber somewhere in this area. I need to know what's inside." Mira studied the cliffs rising from the Atlantic like broken teeth. "Your uncle wouldn't happen to be Edwin Kincaid." Rachel's surprise must have shown on her face, because Mira smiled grimly. "My father worked coastal projects in the 70s, classified Navy contracts that paid well and asked for absolute silence. He disappeared during one of those projects, right around here. His boat was found empty, drifting 3 miles offshore. They ruled it an accident, but he was too good a seaman to just fall overboard." Understanding passed between them without words. They were both daughters of men who had died keeping other people's secrets. The low tide revealed what centuries of storms had tried to conceal: a collapsed tunnel entrance half buried in rockfall and kelp. Mira anchored the boat offshore and led Rachel through tide pools toward the opening, their movements careful on the slick stone. Inside, the passage widened into a roughly circular chamber carved from the granite shelf. At the far end stood an iron door, its surface pitted with rust but still solid. The same naval insignia Rachel had seen beneath the lighthouse was stenciled across the metal, faded but unmistakable. "Someone's been here recently," Mira said, pointing to fresh crowbar marks around the doorframe, "and they've been cutting the lock." They forced the door open together, metal screeching in protest. Beyond lay a smaller chamber containing rusted equipment, abandoned naval crates, and a waterlogged safe that somehow survived decades of salt air and moisture. Rachel pried open the safe while Mira kept watch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a logbook bound in leather. The pages were damp but legible, filled with technical specifications and test results for something called Project Neptune Array. She flipped to the final entries, dated October 1971. Test activation coordinates, sonar pulse frequencies, and beneath them, in different handwriting, a list of unintended consequences. Vessel meridian, catastrophic resonance event, diving platform echo, structural collapse, research submersible Dover, pressure hull failure. Her father's ship wasn't the only victim. The array had been tested multiple times, each activation destroying something or someone in the water above. "We need to go," Mira said from the entrance. "Someone's coming." They scrambled back through the tunnel as an engine growled overhead. Rachel clutched the logbook against her chest, feeling the dampness seep through her jacket. Behind them, footsteps echoed in the chamber they had just left. That night, Sheriff Calloway knocked on Rachel's motel room door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you've been diving around the old government site, Miss Kincaid. That's federal property, miss. Trespassing comes with serious consequences." "Then arrest me." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm giving you a courtesy warning. This is your last one. Whatever you think you're going to find, whatever you think you're going to prove, it ends badly for people who dig too deep. Your uncle learned that. Evelyn learned that. Don't make me add your name to the list." He left without waiting for a response, but his message was clear. She was being watched, she was running out of time, and the people protecting the array's secrets were done with subtle warnings.
By taking their money, by guarding their secrets. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. How many others have died to protect this place? Just 2. A new voice spoke from above, thin and aged, but clear. David Kincaid and Edwin Kincaid. Brothers who couldn't let the past stay buried.
Rachel looked up to see an elderly woman descending the ladder with surprising grace. She wore a cardigan and sensible shoes and carried herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had outlived her fears. When she reached the bottom, she smiled at Rachel with genuine warmth. "My name is Evelyn Strand. I work at the town library, and I've been waiting 30 years for someone like you to arrive." Calloway turned on Evelyn, his face darkening with anger. "What are you doing here?" "What I should have done decades ago." Evelyn reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a small leather-bound book, barely larger than her palm. "Miss Kincaid, your uncle left something in the library's restricted archives, something he wanted you to have if you proved brave enough to dig for the truth." She held out the book. "It's a cipher key. Edwin's journal is encoded beyond the surface entries. Everything he really learned, everything he really discovered is hidden in the margins and between the lines. This will reveal it all." Rachel took the book, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. Not just information, but proof, evidence that could expose the Navy's crimes, bring justice for her father, maybe even shut down whatever machinery still hummed behind the sealed door. Calloway reached for his service weapon, but Evelyn raised her hand, stopping him with a gesture. "Before you do something you'll regret, Sheriff, consider this. I've been documenting everything for 30 years. Names, dates, payments, deaths. I've kept records of every visitor who came to this lighthouse, every federal agent who paid you off, every suspicious accident that kept the secret buried. Those records are in a safe deposit box in Portland, with instructions to open them if I die under even slightly unusual circumstances." She smiled at him, sweet and terrible. "So, unless you want to spend your remaining years in federal prison, I suggest you let Miss Kincaid leave, with the cipher, with the truth." The standoff stretched out, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Rachel's hand moved to the cipher book, ready to defend it if necessary. Jonas looked between all of them, clearly torn between loyalty and conscience. Finally, Calloway lowered his hand from his weapon. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn. They won't let this stand. You know what they're capable of. I've known for 34 years. The difference is, I'm finally ready to stop being afraid." She turned to Rachel. "Come to the library tomorrow. Bring your uncle's journal. I'll help you decode it, and I'll tell you everything I know about Project Neptune Array, everything I was too frightened to say while Edwin was alive." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He tried so hard to protect me, to protect everyone. But some truths are too important to stay buried, even when speaking them means paying the ultimate price." Rachel nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Evelyn had risked everything, had spent decades preparing for this confrontation, all to help a stranger uncover a truth that might destroy them both. Evelyn climbed the ladder first, moving slowly but steadily. Rachel followed, clutching the cipher book and her uncle's journal. Jonas came next, his face unreadable. Calloway remained at the bottom, staring at the sealed door, his expression a mixture of resignation and something darker. "This isn't over," he called up. "You're opening doors that should stay closed. When the people who commissioned that machine find out what you're doing, they won't send warnings, they'll send solutions." Rachel didn't respond. She climbed out of the hatch and into the lighthouse's ground floor, where the first gray light of false dawn was beginning to filter through the broken windows. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the ocean beyond, dark and restless, keeping its secrets and its dead. Evelyn was waiting by the entrance, her cardigan pulled tight against the morning chill. "I'll see you at the library, 9 o'clock. Don't be late, Miss Kincaid. We have a lot of work to do, and I suspect we're running out of time." She left without another word, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness with the steady gait of someone who had finally made peace with a difficult decision. Jonas emerged from the hatch, closing it behind him. He looked at Rachel with an expression that mingled shame and hope.
I meant what I said earlier. Your uncle was a good man, and I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think he would have wanted you to finish what he started, whatever that means. It means finding the truth. It means making sure my father's death wasn't for nothing. The truth has a cost." Jonas glanced back at the hatch, where Calloway was presumably still standing in the darkness below. "Evelyn just made herself a target. And if you keep digging, you will too. I've been a target since I inherited this place. The only question is whether I run or fight." Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "For what it's worth, I'll help you. My grandfather took his guilt to the grave. I won't do the same." He left through the main entrance, his footsteps crunching on gravel as he walked toward a pickup truck Rachel hadn't noticed in the darkness. The engine started with a cough of blue smoke, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the lighthouse and its buried secrets. Rachel stood in the circular chamber as dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the fog in shades of gold and crimson. The hum beneath her feet continued its relentless rhythm, a heartbeat from the deep that had been counting time for decades, waiting for someone to finally listen. She opened her uncle's journal and pressed the cipher book against its pages, ready to begin the work of translation, ready to uncover what Edwin really learned, what he really discovered in his 30 years of vigil. The first encoded message, when she applied the cipher, read, "They didn't just sink David's ship. They used the array to map something else that day, something that should have stayed lost. The question isn't why they killed him, it's what they found." Rachel stared at the decoded words as the sun rose higher, burning away the fog, revealing the vast expanse of ocean that held her father's bones and God knows what else. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't leaving Gullhaven until she had answers, until she had justice, until she had made the people responsible pay for every life they destroyed to keep their secrets buried in the dark. Rachel arrived at the Gullhaven Public Library precisely at 9 o'clock, the cipher book and journal tucked inside her messenger bag. The building was a converted sea captain's mansion, all weathered shingles and salt-stained windows, bookshelving where parlors had once hosted society gatherings. Evelyn Strand waited at a corner table in the maritime history section, surrounded by open volumes and yellowed newspaper clippings. She looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had spent decades cataloging secrets. "I was a stenographer, 1963 to 1971, employed by a naval contractor doing classified work along the coast. They brought me in because I was young, local, and poor enough to need the money without asking questions." She pushed a folder across the table. "I documented everything about Project Neptune Array, every meeting, every test, every failure."
Rachel hit the ground, hands over her ears, feeling the vibration pass through her like a ghost. When she looked up, the lighthouse was gone. Only rubble remained, and a crater where the northern cliff face had stood for 10,000 years. Sheriff Calloway was gone too, swallowed by the collapse or thrown into the sea. Rachel would never know which, and discovered she didn't care enough to wonder. The storm cleared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind an eerie calm. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance. The town had felt the explosion, the earthquake, the end of a secret that had poisoned Gullhaven for decades. Jonas looked at the crater where the lighthouse had stood and smiled through his pain. "Grandfather would have been proud," he whispered. "We finally made it right." Rachel held his hand as they waited for the ambulances, watching the Atlantic reclaim the stones and secrets that had never truly belonged on land. 6 weeks later, Rachel stood in what remained of Widow's Point as federal investigators combed through the rubble. They had found the Neptune Array, or what was left of it. The explosion had fused the ring into a twisted sculpture of metal and melted components, identifiable only by the naval insignia still visible on one intact section. The story had broken exactly as Rachel had planned. 3 major newspapers published simultaneously, documenting Project Neptune Array, its capabilities, and the lives sacrificed to keep it secret. Congressional hearings were scheduled. The Secretary of the Navy had resigned, and the families of David Kincaid, Evelyn Strand, and 23 other victims finally had answers about how their loved ones had died. Jonas had survived, though he'd lost the use of his left arm in the collapse. He was recovering in Portland, giving depositions to federal prosecutors about his grandfather's involvement and the decades of cover-up that followed. The last time Rachel had visited, he'd seemed lighter somehow, as if the truth had burned away the weight he'd carried all his life. Captain Mira Devane had returned to her salvage work, but not before extracting a promise from Rachel to call if she ever needed help again. They'd formed the kind of bond that only came from facing death together, and Rachel suspected Mira would reappear in her life when least expected and most needed. The motel room had become Rachel's temporary home, filled with boxes of documents, her uncle's decoded journals, and Evelyn's meticulously maintained records. She spent her days organizing evidence for the prosecutors, and her nights reading through decades of observations, seeing the dedication and loneliness that had defined Edwin's vigil. One afternoon, a postal worker delivered a padded envelope marked with Evelyn's return address, but no postmark. Rachel opened it with trembling hands and found a letter written in the librarian's precise script. Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, then I've passed, and you've begun the work of exposing what we've kept hidden for so long. I want you to know that your father was a hero, not because he threatened to expose the array, but because he understood that some knowledge is too dangerous to exist regardless of its strategic value. Edwin told me once that David had planned to destroy the prototype himself, but they killed him before he could act. Your uncle spent 30 years trying to finish what his brother started, but he was always alone, always afraid that acting too boldly would get more innocent people killed. You're not alone now. You have allies, evidence, and the courage that runs in your family's blood. Finish this, Rachel. Give our dead the justice they deserved. And when it's over, don't let the guilt consume you the way it consumed Edwin. Some of us are meant to be guardians. Others are meant to be warriors. Know which one you are. With hope and admiration, Evelyn Strand. Rachel folded the letter carefully and added it to the archive she was building, a memorial made of paper and truth, ensuring that no one would forget what happened at Widow Point. She drove back to the crater one last time before returning to Boston. The state had fenced off the area, declaring it too unstable for public access, but Rachel had credentials now as a material witness and expert consultant. The guards waved her through without question. The crater was smaller than she remembered, already filling with rainwater and broken stones. In a few years, nature would reclaim it completely, grass and scrub covering the scars. But the memory would remain, encoded in congressional records and newspaper archives, a warning about the cost of secrets kept too long. Rachel stood at the edge and looked out at the Atlantic. Somewhere beneath those waves, her father's ship rested in eternal darkness. She would never recover his body, never have a grave to visit. But she had given him something better, vindication, and the knowledge that his death had not been in vain.
I finished it, Dad, she said quietly. It's done. The ocean offered no reply, but she felt something settle inside her chest,
a tension she'd carried for 30 years, finally releasing. She turned away from the crater and walked back to her car, leaving Widow's Point behind for the last time. Or so she thought. 3 months later, the town council contacted her with an unexpected proposal. They wanted to rebuild the lighthouse as a memorial and research station, a place where marine biologists and historians could study the coast and teach about the dangers of unchecked government secrecy. They wanted Rachel to oversee the project. She should have said no. She should have returned to her life in Boston, found another research position, moved forward. But standing in her apartment, looking at the blueprints they'd sent, Rachel realized she had been a guardian all along. Just like her uncle. Just like her father. She called the council president and accepted. 1 year to the day after the collapse, Rachel stood inside the newly restored lighthouse as workers completed the final touches on the beacon assembly. The tower was smaller than the original, built on the reinforced foundation that extended deep into the bedrock away from the unstable crater. The design was modern, incorporating sustainable technology and safety features Edwin would have appreciated. The community had embraced the project with surprising enthusiasm, perhaps recognizing that healing required acknowledgement rather than continued silence. A memorial garden surrounded the tower, with plaques honoring the victims of Project Neptune Array. Evelyn Strand's name was first on the list, followed by David Kincaid and the 23 others who had died testing a machine that should never have been built. Jonas arrived in the afternoon, his left arm in a permanent sling, but his expression peaceful. He'd served 6 months of probation for his role in concealing the array, a sentence reduced in recognition of his ultimate courage. He brought flowers for Evelyn's plaque and spent a long time standing beside it, lips moving in silent conversation. She would have liked this, he said when Rachel joined him. A lighthouse that illuminates the truth instead of hiding it. That's the idea. I looked up at the tower, clean and white against the blue autumn sky, though I'm still not sure I'm qualified to run a research station. You exposed a 40-year cover-up, survived 2 murder attempts, and convinced Congress to investigate the Navy's black projects. I think you're qualified, Jonas smiled. Besides, you're a Kincaid. Lighthouses are in your blood. The dedication ceremony began at dusk. The town gathered below as Rachel climbed to the beacon chamber. Mira had returned for the occasion, standing with the crowd, her weathered face proud. The new mayor gave a speech about transparency and accountability, carefully avoiding any mention of Sheriff Calloway, whose body had never been recovered from the Atlantic. Memorial stones. The fence had come down months ago, transformed from a warning into an invitation to remember. She flipped the switch. The beacon ignited, LED arrays replacing the old Fresnel lens, casting clean white light across the darkening ocean. The crowd below applauded. Boat horns sounded from the harbor. For the first time in over 30 years, Widow's Point was lit. Rachel watched the beam sweep across the water, illuminating fishing boats and waves, a rhythm that would continue every night, guiding ships away from the rocks and towards safe harbor. This was what lighthouses were meant to do. Not hide secrets, but reveal dangers. Not serve powers in distant cities, but protect the people who lived beside the sea. She began the speech she'd prepared, talking about truth and legacy, about the courage required to confront the past and the vigilance needed to prevent its repetition. Her voice carried through the loudspeakers, steady and clear. But as she spoke, as the beacon continued its rotation, Rachel felt something beneath her feet. A faint vibration, so subtle she might have imagined it. A rhythm that matched the pulse of the beacon above, as if something deep in the bedrock was responding to the light.
She paused mid-sentence, pressing her palm against the floor. There, unmistakable now. A hum, distant and low, the ghost of a frequency that should have been silenced forever. The explosion had destroyed the Neptune array's physical structure, fused its components into slag, but the granite shelf itself had been transformed by decades of acoustic bombardment, its crystalline structure altered at the molecular level. The stone remembered. The stone resonated. And somewhere in the deep places where light couldn't reach, something was still listening. Rachel continued her speech, her voice never faltering, even as her hand remained pressed against the floor. She talked about the importance of remembering, of staying vigilant, of understanding that some mysteries couldn't be completely erased, only contained. This lighthouse stands as a reminder that illumination always carries shadows, that truth requires guardians, and that the work of transparency is never finished because the instinct to hide, to classify, to protect secrets at any cost is eternally human. The beacon swept across the ocean, and far below, too deep for any equipment to detect, a faint blue pulse answered. Once, twice, then silence. Rachel descended from the tower to join the celebration, accepting congratulations and answering questions about the research programs they would implement. But part of her remained in the beacon chamber, feeling that subtle vibration, understanding what it meant. The machine was gone, the project was exposed, the victims were honored, but the shelf itself had become a kind of living archive, holding echoes of everything that had been done to it. Some secrets didn't sleep. They just waited, embedded in stone and ocean floor, patient as geology. She would watch. She would listen. She would maintain the vigil her uncle had kept for 30 years, but this time with transparency instead of silence, with community instead of isolation. As the crowd dispersed and darkness settled over Gullhaven, Rachel stood at the cliff edge where the old lighthouse had fallen. The memorial garden glowed softly in the light from the new tower. Jonas joined her, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who understood the weight of inheritance. "Do you ever wonder," Jonas asked quietly, "if we really destroyed it, or if we just taught it to hide better?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She listened to the ocean, to the wind, to the faint metallic hum that only she and Jonas seemed to hear. Finally, she smiled, sad and knowing. "I think some questions aren't meant to have answers, only guardians." The beacon swept across the water, regular and eternal, a rhythm that would outlast them both. And beneath the waves, where pressure crushed light into darkness and secrets aged like wine, something pulsed in response. Waiting. Listening. Patient.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.